Hey everybody, how are you? This is Mike Van Meter and welcome to the Recovery is Possible podcast. And I want to thank you for joining me, and you can reach us at our Facebook site, which is also called Recovery is Possible, or our website, which is vanmeterwellnesssolutions.com. And this podcast, as you know, exists to educate the public about addiction and remove the stigma associated with addiction. And folks, just want to let you know that this episode is sponsored by FHE Health, Substance Abuse and Mental Health Treatment Center, specializing in treatment for first responders' needs, including PTSD, anxiety, and substance use. So take the first steps to a better life today by visiting FHEHealth.com. And folks, I want to bring on a guest to the show, Frank Runles, and Frank Runles has his own podcast out there. It's called Lies People Tell, and coincidentally, that's also the name of a new book that he put out, Lies People Tell, and the title, or the subtitle, is actually An FBI Agent's Toolkit for Coaching Liars and Cheats. Now, the question might be, well, why are we talking about that on this podcast? And the reason being is this book, which is excellent, and I highly recommend that you get it, has applications to nearly everyone and to everything that we do. And particularly when it comes to addiction, which is the topic of this podcast, because lying and being deceptive in different forms of deception affect us in all of our lives, particularly in addiction. We lie to ourselves, we lie to others, and then when we end up in treatment or in recovery, we lie about our own use. And not always because we are trying to deceive people. Sometimes we just can't come to the realization that the situation is as bad as it is. And we really want to hide that from ourselves. And as you know, recovery is about brutal honesty and becoming honest with yourself and others as well. And just by way of background, as many of you know, I was an instructor down at the FBI Academy, specifically at the FBI National Academy, and I was teaching leading at risk employees as well as some other courses. And my good friend Frank Runles was also an instructor at the National Academy, and he was teaching a course on statement analysis. And I would sit in and I would watch Frank teach, and he'll discuss the topics that he talked about in that class, and it was phenomenal. But of course, I'm looking at this course through the lens of the world that I work in, and I just thought, man, there are so many similarities between what Frank does and what I'm doing, and we would get into long discussions about it. And I just thought, man, you got to come on this podcast and talk to our listeners about how this works and how we can apply it to ourselves. And Frank, after he retired, started his own podcast and then began working on the book that we're going to be talking about. And I'm so proud of him because he completed it this past year, got it published. It's out, and he can tell you how to get it. But it is a phenomenal book, lots of applications to every aspect of your life. And I'm really excited to have Frank come in and talk about it. We also did an entire episode on his podcast about direct application to recovery. So please check that out. Again, it's called Lies People Tell. With that, Frank, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Mike. I appreciate you having me on.
Yeah, tell us a bit about yourself and, a little bit about what you do and what prompted you to write this book. And then we'll go into how this applies to what we do.
Well, I'm a retired FBI agent, spent 20 plus years as an FBI agent. Prior to that, I was in the Army for 10 years. And I worked criminal matters and spent a lot of my time, majority of my time, interviewing people. And the one thing I've learned in being an FBI agent was that being able to talk to people and understand what they're saying and being able to determine if they're being truthful to me or not was essential for me to be able to do my job properly. But in a larger extent, it's kind of essential to be able to do that just to live a good life. So when I retired, I had the opportunity to learn a lot about statement analysis and how words work and how people use different phrases in different contexts to try to deceive people. And I took everything I learned about detection, deception, and statement analysis and dissolved it down into what I call deceptive language analysis. It's a little different from statement analysis. I use statements in the book to give an example of what we're talking about, but I look at language and when people are being deceptive, using deceptive language, as opposed to looking for when they're telling me the big lie, because I found that if you're spending time trying to catch someone in a lie, you're not listening to half the things they're saying because you're sitting there plotting your trap to catch them in a lie. The reality is you can learn so much more if you just listen to them openly and with curiosity, take in everything they say, and just start saying, okay, well, why did they say it this way? Why did they use this term? Why did they say we when it should have been me? Those type of things. Why did they give me a lot of information, extraneous information, that's not really answering the question asked? That's all in the realm of deceptive language. And those are all strong indicators that someone's being deceptive. So I wrote this book more, not as a law enforcement book, because there's books out there for specifically law enforcement talking about statement analysis and detection of deception. I wrote this book for the common person, the person that interviews people for a living if you're a mentor, or like in your field, counseling, whether it be addiction or just counseling someone on career, business, whatever. But specifically in this case, addiction. If you're a mentor, if you're an HR manager hiring people, if you're a boss interviewing people for a job, or you're mediating between disputes between your subordinates or employees, there's so many applications for the deceptive language analysis in your everyday life. And I felt like I have this much knowledge that I need to share it with people so people don't get, cheated and ripped off because someone was slick and double talked them and they sort of knew something wasn't right, but they didn't know why they knew it. I want everybody to walk away when they're done with this saying, okay, now I know what they were trying to pull there, and being forewarned is forearmed.
It is. And it really does have an application to addiction. And I know in my own life, it was important because, we keep these secrets from ourselves and certainly from others. And, Frank, when I go through the DSM-5, the Diagnostics and Statistics Manual, and we look at, diagnosing someone with alcohol use disorder or opiate use disorder or substance use disorder or any of the other number of disorders that are out there, one of the criteria is actually being, and I'm paraphrasing here, but being deceptive about your use and not being honest with others about your use. Because after all, I just take alcohol, for example, normal social drinkers don't hide bottles. They don't lie about their use because there's no need to. Why would you lie about it if you didn't have a particular problem? And
right.
Maybe just starting with that, if you're talking to your loved one and you're interviewing them, what would that look like? And if somebody is trying to, let's say you come home and you're asking your spouse about their use and you're talking to them about that, what would that look like? What would be some examples? What would you be looking for?
Well, let's take the broad strokes of what deceptive language looked like, and in the book, the first half of the book is very much broad strokes where it's the very big indicators that jump out at you if you know what you're looking for. And then the second half of the book is more drills down linguistically on nouns, verbs, adverbs, and how those are used. So let's talk a broad stroke. When most people try to be deceptive, they give a statement using what I call an imbalanced statement. So say you're talking to someone and you're asking them about an incident where maybe they abuse, alcohol or narcotics. After they swore off that they wouldn't do it again, they did it again. And you asked them, why would you do such a thing? And, tell me about what you did last night. Say it was you went on a drinking binge, right? And you say, tell me about what last night, what happened? Now, they know what you're referring to. You're referring to their incident, whether it's a drinking binge or using narcotics or whatever. If they spend the majority of the time telling you everything except what they did that night, say they give you this long dissertation on, I went to the grocery store and I bought this, but I decided I didn't like this type of bread, so I went and tried to find another type of bread, but they didn't have it, so I talked to the store manager and he said that he could order it for me, and and I decided it's not worth it. And then I went and got this, and then I stopped and got gas, and they go through this whole long litany of details that are meaningless to the question asked. And when they finally get to the point, well, then I sat down and I cracked open a bottle of whatever, beverage that they wanted to drink that night. And, I drank myself into a stupor, and then I fell asleep. The majority of that statement did not deal with what they did, the incident they're talking about, the drinking. It talked about everything but. So that's what I call an imbalanced statement. So if you ask someone, whatever the subject be, but in this case, a drinking, let's say a drinking incident when, they've sworn off drinking, and they spend almost their whole time telling you everything except about the drinking because they don't want to address that, or they get to that point in the story and they say, I didn't drink anything, and I can't believe you'd ask for that, and move on. They're being deceptive because they're trying to avoid telling a lie. Because lying is hard to do for most people. Mm-hmm. I know it seems strange when people hear, well, how can lying be hard to do? Well, it's hard to do because it creates such a cognitive overload and stressors, because you have to come up with a lie that's convincing, that has enough detail that it sounds realistic, but not so much detail that you can't keep it straight. And you have to be able to remember this and do it over and over again, because you may be asked the same thing numerous times in different ways. And that you're lying, and if you get caught, there's a consequence. That's a lot of stress. So people avoid lying, but that's why they use deceptive language. They'll say, well, why did you drink last night? Well, I didn't drink that much. Well, that wasn't the question. And now we've established that you drank, but you're saying you didn't drink that much. That's an equivalent. That's a minimizer. He's minimizing how much he drank. Or, as I said, they give a long dissertation to give the appearance that I'm not hiding anything, I'm not holding anything back. But when you ask yourself how much of the information they gave you was pertinent, you'd see that almost none of it was pertinent to the drinking incident itself. So that's one of the easiest and biggest ways. And along with that, all of that information they're giving you up front is what I call extraneous information. Now, extraneous information sounds like, well, that means it's meaningless. No, actually, extraneous information is very important, because many times people will give you clues inside the extraneous information of their motivations and why they did it. Because what extraneous information does is it serves two purposes. It serves the purpose of justifying actions and behaviors. So you're giving an explanation of why you did what you did through extraneous information, or it's answering a question that was never asked. We never asked about the trip to the grocery store, the gas station, or anything like that, but you're telling us all of these things leading up to it. Now, the extraneous information in that story, maybe what's important is all of those things, the frustrations of not being able to get the bread he wants, the frustration of having to pay high gas prices at the pump, who knows? Maybe that was the trigger for the drinking incident. We don't know. But that extraneous information is everything that they're giving you that's really not pertinent to the question at hand, but it still could be important to indicate some of their motivations or reasons of why they did what they did.
Yeah, and I will tell you, so we can talk about families here in a second, but I can tell you, in training to be a counselor right now, one of the things I do when patients come in is we do an assessment. If you end up in a treatment center, you're going to sit down with a counselor, and they're going to do what's known as a BPSA, or a biopsychosocial assessment. And in the assessment, that's when we're collecting data on the patient. And there's a lot of information that's gathered in there: biographical data, what's your education level, your family. Particularly, we want to find out what sort of addictions and other issues and mental health issues have occurred in the family. And ultimately, in the mix of all those questions, we're going to be talking about the patient's use. Now, I can tell you, I have yet to see a patient where the BPSA that I did when they came in, and then as the time goes on while they're in treatment, in our particular case, it's just under a month that they're with us, the information that I get from the patients in those ensuing 4 weeks looks radically different than what we took in that first week. with the BPSA, when we do that initial. So I'll do that initial interview, and then we'll go through all the group sessions and individual sessions. And then, of course, more information comes out. So it's very important, however, though, because to get the correct information when the patient comes in, because that information in the BPSA, when they first come in, is used to put together the treatment plan, which is what is going to be used to determine what you do with the patient in the next 4 weeks. So the more information that you can get, more accurate information you can get in that BPSA, the more effective the treatment plan is going to be. And so everybody is going to minimize the amount of use. I almost guarantee that when a patient tells me what they're using, first of all, the types of drugs or alcohol, it's usually going to be more than what they're telling us. And then the amount, certainly the amount is going to be much less than what they were really using. So Frank, maybe address, what are the motivators behind the patient doing that to begin with? And then what could, in our case, a counselor do in the interview to maximize accuracy and honesty from the patient when they first come in?
Well, what they're doing is the classic case of you minimizing or intensifying. You use adverbs to either minimize or intensify actions. So when they come in and they're minimizing, and they all will minimize their drug or alcohol use, and they want to appear not as bad as they think they will if they tell you everything. If I tell you, well, I only, smoke weed once a day, and it turns out I smoke it 45 times a day. Well, there's a huge difference in between the two. But in his mind, it's much more acceptable to say one time versus 45. The reality is it's 45. Or he will intensify that I would never, ever do such a thing. He is going to be very, intense to let you know that I would never do such a thing. I want to prove to you that, and it's always like over the top, trying to justify and convince, because when you're using minimizers or intensifiers, you're not really conveying information. You're trying to convince. You're either trying to convince me that you don't use alcohol or drugs or whatever as much as you really do, that you're not in as bad a shape as you really are. Financially, you're not broke because you used all your money on the verge of bankruptcy because of your addiction. Or you're trying to convince me that you would never do such a thing and your family's the most important thing, and that you're trying to you're doing the best anybody could ever do. You're trying to convince, not convey. All you're asking is tell me this, this, and this. And if they're spending a lot of time with minimizers or intensifiers, they're trying to deceive you because they're trying to convince you of something, and you can almost rest assured they're not being honest, because you're asking them a straightforward question. How many times have you done this? And, if they, especially if they become off as being like, how dare you ask such a thing? Mm-hmm. Why would you ever think such a thing? Mm-hmm. What are you trying to say? Well, now they're being defensive, but what they're actually trying to do is they're trying to get you off the scent. They're trying to get you to back away. They're using negation and equivocations and and counter accusations to get you, on the defensive yourself. The best thing you can do is just stand your ground and ask for what I call amplification or clarification questions. Tell me more about your drug abuse. You say you do it once a day. Tell me more about that. And just leave it open-ended. Don't say, well, you can say, well, when do you do that? What time of the day do you do that? And then you say, is there other times that you do this? And, you just start asking more and more open-ended questions, not leading questions, but open-ended questions. Tell me more about that. Tell me more about the one time that you smoke weed. Tell me about the other times you smoke weed. Tell me about the other times you drank in excess. How many nights have you done it this week? And just start delving into, well, why do you do that? Or what do you feel is the cause for that? And just start probing, asking those open-ended, not soft, but, direct questions. And don't let the accusations and the trying to put you off and to challenge you on that. Because remember, they're trying to convince you of something, which means they're being deceptive. All they do is have to answer the question honestly. They have a binary choice. Either answer the question honestly or try to deceive you.
Yeah, and to me, and correct me if I'm wrong on this, but it's something that I've done when I'm working with the patients. And let me describe to you some of the experiences that I've had, and then kind of filter this through the work that you're doing and the work in your book. I get a lot of that, and I will have patients come. Now, understand, these are patients that their situation was to the point to where they had to go through a detox and end up in a 28-day treatment. And, so that their situation brought them there. Then when they're there, they will try to convince you that they really don't need to be there, that this is some sort of a mistake, that, this place is for real alcoholics and real drug addicts, and they're neither of those. And what I have done is ask people, has anyone in your life ever told you, when you're talking about the binary questions, has anyone in your life told you that you needed to come here? And the answer is always yes. Have you tried to stop drinking before? Yes. So that's either yes or no. Do you think that coming here was a mistake? No. Okay. Would you mind if we go through the DSM-5 and look at the 11 criteria for alcohol use disorder, if we're talking about alcohol? And then we go through the 11 criteria, and those are very binary questions too. Does this happen? Have you ever drunk to excess, for example, or decided you were going to drink a certain amount and then went beyond that? Yes or no? Did you wake up with a hangover? Yes or no? Has this caused social problems, personal or professional problems? Yes or no? And on down the line. Now, you only need to meet 2 of those criteria to meet the minimum threshold for alcohol use disorder. And, it's interesting when I walk through that and just try to be matter of fact and non-judgmental. It's amazing how, and usually the patient will meet all 11 criteria, not just 2. And then to say, so what do you think of that? Has that changed your perspective about this conversation? And the people that I've done that with, it really sheds light on the severity of the situation and convinces them to look at the entire situation in a different way. But it seems to me, Frank, that doing that in a non-judgmental, non-accusatory way, particularly in light that there's so much stigma associated and shame associated with addiction, that's effective. And that's a way of reducing the anxiety that the patient is having and doing that. But you do that in criminal work as well. When you're interviewing somebody in a criminal case, you want to really reduce that anxiety that they have and feel comfortable and understand that having this conversation ultimately is for their benefit. Maybe your thoughts on that, Frank. Now, I'm not doing it technically, thinking about it the way that you are, but in essence, I'm trying to use the same concepts.
And what you're doing is most of the time we want to ask open-ended questions, but there are instances when closed-ended questions like that, yes or no questions, are appropriate and will actually move the ball down the field. So what you're doing is when you ask them, has anyone ever in your life told you should go to counseling or rehab or whatever, that's a yes or no. Now, going back to my belief is that most people have a hard time lying. They like to default to the truth because it's more comfortable. We've been socialized to tell the truth. Only bad people lie, and they don't want to think of themselves as bad people. By asking them that question, they have to decide, am I going to be truthful or am I going to be deceptive? And it really reduces those choices down to 1 or 2. Now, and it's hard to lie because it's a yes or no question. So if they say no and they know people have told them, now they're lying. So in those situations, that works very well to ask these closed-ended yes or no questions and then expand on it. Like, why do you think that they would say, why do you think they said and have told you that you should go to counseling, to get them to elaborate on it, to let them sort of marinate in the reasoning and let them voice it. And once they voice it, it's much easier for them to own it then, because suddenly it's coming from them, and you're sitting there. And that's one of the things that I talk about in my book is you listen with curiosity. You're sitting there not thinking, okay, here's the next question I want to ask, because I'm going to try to rope him into this scenario so he has to admit I'm right. What you're really doing is you're listening with curiosity to say, I want to hear what he's going to say. I want to hear his side of it, his thoughts on it, why he's doing this, why he's gotten himself in this position, or why other people think he should be here. And once you listen closely and with curiosity to what he's saying, you're going to have so much more insight into his psyche, his motivations, and what triggers are going to work or not work with this person. So yeah, it's the whole point, and that is kind of the point of the book is I want to teach people to know how they can recognize deceptive language. But that's not the answer in and of itself. The next step is once they recognize the deceptive language, how do they question that person to really reveal their deception, or at least in their mind know this person is not being straight with me, so I don't need to do business with them, or I need to take this conversation in a different direction. And that's what you're doing with this initial assessment. And I think it's a very smart strategy because you walk them down this path through a series of yes and no questions, and it forces them to really confront the truth, have to take it, and then I would expand on it and let them explain to me, well, why do people say these type of things? And so I think in that respect, that's a very effective way of doing it.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And you talk about in the book, too, about getting at the reasoning. So we know the reason now, and you've laid that out, why people are deceptive and why people lie to begin with. And let's be very clear, it's not always because they necessarily want to hide something or they're trying to get away with something. There could be shame, there could be stigma, there could be maybe there's fearful. In the case in the work that I do, they're sometimes, to be honest, I think they're fearful of knowing the truth for themselves. Forget about their loved ones or work. I think sometimes addiction can be so bad that they don't want to face the truth themselves, not for any nefarious reason, but it's just hard to do, right? So you talk about in the book. Go ahead.
Well, there's a lot of shame and embarrassment, not only for themselves, but family members, co-workers, neighbors, family. I mean, there's such a stigma around addiction, unnecessarily so, that many people really, especially when you're talking like here where we live in the D.C. area, if you're talking about a high-priced consultant or a political operative, and he goes to rehab, that could be a real problem for him business-wise, and so they really want to avoid this as much as they can. So yeah, that's why there's a lot of deception involved with it, because there's a lot of embarrassment. There's a lot at stake for them sometimes. And it's not because they're bad people. It's because they've got fears, some of them well-founded fears, that have nothing to do with breaking the law. It's just because of life circumstances.
Right. So let's just throw out this example because, and you're absolutely right. In the center where I work, we get a lot of those types of people, a lot of government, people that come in. Now, we know that if they're there, they really need to be there, and we're going to work to get them help. But until we can break that barrier, there's things that we need to do, and we need to get the patient to look at this differently. And again, I'm saying patient, but if this is your loved one that you're talking about, understand that there's that stigma, there's that shame, there's that embarrassment. But let's move to now. In your book, you talk about really describing to the person that you're talking to why this conversation and why honesty is in their best interest. Now, if this is the criminal world, it may be getting a lighter sentence. It may be helping others, confronting their past, or there's benefits for them. But in this world, what sort of arguments would you have, or what sort of attack would you have then to break that down and convince the person that you're talking to that this conversation and being totally honest is in their best interest?
Well, I break it down at the end of the book. I talk about the two sides to everyone that you have to confront. You have the missionary side of a person, the person that wants to do the right thing, do good things to help people. And then you have the mercenary side. And we all have the mercenary side that want to take care of ourselves, want to benefit ourselves. Our actions are sometimes, many times, taken to achieve certain goals that are going to be beneficial to us, either monetarily, professionally, reputation-wise on the job, what have you, ego building, and such as that. So it comes down to, with deceptive language, you can use it either as a mercenary or as a missionary. The mercenary in you says, I'll use every trick in the book to get, in the criminal world, a confession from someone. In the business world, someone to make a deal or buy a product from you. In the counseling world, to, submit to whatever treatment that's being recommended for them. And you can use a lot of the stuff I teach. If you want to recognize what deceptive language is, it's easy to use it because you know what it is now. You've got a label for it, and you know how it's being applied. So you can use that mercenary side. And we all do that to a certain degree with our daily lives because we all have certain needs we want to accomplish. But you have to temper it with your missionary side. And in my world, I would always try to get a confession from a bad guy when I had a case, because I could then go to the prosecutor and say, okay, they confessed, they're cooperating, they gave us information, they're willing to, stand up and take whatever punishment, but they are taking full responsibility for their action. What does that do for them? That gives them opportunity to get a lesser sentence, and it also gives me an opportunity to speak on their behalf, because if I can get them a lesser sentence, they're probably going to take a plea. They may be able to testify against other people, and I'm going to wrap this case up quicker so I can move on to my next case. So the missionary side is I'm going to help them. The mercenary side, so I can go do more cases and put more bad guys away, because that's what I did for a living. Same thing in the rest of the world. You can use this deceptive language in a mercenary way and forget the missionary side of it. And you can't do it. You always have to balance it and you may use some of these techniques for the purpose of getting someone help in the rehab world. If you're trying to do an intervention with someone to get them in rehab to save their life, that's the missionary side of you. The mercenary side of it is you're getting them to do what you want. But the missionary side outweighs that mercenary side. And that's how I kind of balance the two, because it's very easy. I mean, how many times we run across the slick salespeople trying to sell us something, and it turns out that after the fact you find out almost everything they said wasn't the truth, was half truth, deception, and those type of things. That guy's being a mercenary. And that's just not the way to do it, because, he may sell one house, but word's going to get around after a while. No one's buying from this guy after a while. So it's a short-term gain. They're being a mercenary. The missionary side is gone, and that's why eventually they'll lose in the long run. You have to have both.
Yeah, and you remind me of something, Frank. I was looking at this concept the other day. It's called the miracle question. And what the miracle question is, if you're a counselor and you're working with a patient who is just at rock bottom and their life is just miserable, they've got employment problems, family problems, financial problems, maybe even criminal problems, all those different things, and it's drugs and alcohol that led them to that point. The miracle question would be, if you were to close your eyes and I was to say to you, or you were sleeping overnight and say to you that overnight a miracle happened, and that is that you were free from drugs and alcohol, what would that look like? What would your world look like if that miracle just happened without you doing anything? And when they open their eyes and they start telling you about how, my relationships will improve, my employment will improve, my finances will improve, and they will improve because they can't not improve. I think that's just a law of physics. You throw that miracle question out there and then start beginning, okay, well, what do you think? So it's interesting how you then you can turn it back and say, what do you think then you could start doing today to start working towards that miracle that you just had in your mind? How could we get that to happen? Do you see sort of like an application from the tools in your book to making that sort of process occur? Maybe because I know you've talked about good, bad options before, or even storytelling. For example, I might say, hey, Frank, you remind me of this guy that I knew that did this, that, and the other thing. But here's what he did to turn it around. And look at his life today. It got so much better. That's, in the counseling world, it seems like the miracle question is sort of a variant on some of the things that you've taught in the past that I've heard you talk about.
Yeah, well, that comes down to the area of rapport building. Mm-hmm. Because in communication, it's a two-way street. You send and you receive. If you're only sending, communicating, you're the only one talking, you're not listening, you're really not communicating. You have to listen too. And part of getting people to talk to you, getting people to open up to you, is you have to invest in rapport building. And part of that is asking those type of questions and listening to their answers and sort of figuring out what motivates them, what moves them or not. Now, when I talk to someone, I will use this, you try to find a common ground. It's called me and you alike, because oh, you like this, I like this. Oh, you drive that way, I drive that way. I have the same problems as you. They can relate. It's what they call social proofing also, where you're not the only one like that. I'm like that too. And now we've got this commonality, and we can expand on the commonality. And you mentioned storytelling. Storytelling is so powerful if you can use it effectively. If you have a story, many times, we'll use a redemption story, meaning someone was in this bad spot, this bad situation, and through these actions, because they either took responsibility or they changed how they operated or they realized that they have to seek a solution, and they found the solution and it fixed their problem, it improved their life exponentially. And we'll use those stories to give the example of, listen, this is not hopeless. There are other things that can be done, and the key is you can't give up. I mean, and that's kind of the basic of what life is if you give up, you're never going to accomplish anything. Mm-hmm. You're never going to be anywhere. So you have to keep driving and pushing. The miracle question is very similar to another question that I've heard asked in the world of business, and they'll ask this to young entrepreneurs. What would you do if you woke up tomorrow morning and you couldn't fail at what you wanted to do? If you knew there's absolutely no way you're not going to be successful, what would you do? And the key is what they do is, well, I would do this, and I would do this, and I would do this, and I would do this, because now they're motivated and they're saying, well, I can't fail, so now I want to go out there and tackle it. And it's that way of getting them, just like the miracle question, out of that mind frame, shifting their mindset from, I can't do it, to, yeah, you can. You just have to shift your mindset of, you can do this. If you're cured, if you wake up tomorrow morning and you have no more desire for whatever it is, alcohol, heroin, what have you, what would you do with your life? Same thing as if you woke up tomorrow morning and nothing you did would ever fail, what would you try to accomplish? Well, suddenly you would try to accomplish big things. Suddenly, if you knew you didn't have to worry about your addiction, you would start getting your life in order. And, so it's sort of a mindset shift also.
Yeah, it is. And, I'm fascinated by this idea of the in our world, in the counseling world, minimizing adverbs is very, very important. Everybody minimizes the use, and then time jumps, meaning, this concept of, you talked about how lying is difficult and it's hard work. Very, very few people, really, if ever, I can't think of anybody that completely makes up total lies. It's just they don't tell the entire truth. And
Right.
Along with that, they minimize the actual action or the use, or just omitting certain periods, meaning they'll tell you about certain things that they're doing, but then jump to another a period and omitting that information. And that is huge in the counseling world. And as I mentioned, we get the patients that come in and we do that BPSA, the biopsychosocial assessment, and they will give us information. And then oftentimes they will forget that they told us something in that assessment. Now, remember, that's usually when they first come in and they may be detoxing, they may be tired, may not be fully cognizant of everything that they're saying. And then as they clear in time, they start giving us more information. And then when they start talking in group, it's amazing how many times you hear them talk in group and you're like, oh, well, that's a new one. Oh, he or she didn't tell me that before, or that's not quite the way the story was when they told me initially. So if you gave advice to a counselor, Frank, how would you deal with that? How could you really, again, get that information in the beginning, or when you get new information from a patient, how would you approach that patient without being accusatory or destroying the relationship and rapport that you've built with them? How do you start piecing that together in a way that is gentle, you're kind of coming alongside, and you're helping that patient develop the story in a way that they can use then to get well?
Well, you mentioned the minimization and time jumps. The way to handle someone that keeps jumping ahead in time, a time jump is where they use a phrase or a word to move the story along, like then is very, very popular. The word then or later or the next thing you knew or the next thing that happened. And that's moving the story along, but that they jumped from one topic and now they moved on to another topic. So there's a gap there that they've jumped over. They've moved the time ahead. And I want to know what happened between the last scene and this new scene. Because there's something there. There's an impetus there. There's a time period there that they're probably not wanting to talk about because maybe something happened then. So I'd stop them and say, well, you said this and then you went here. Tell me more about what happened right before this, and make them walk backwards a little bit to the scene that they jumped from. Because there's many times something there that they don't want to talk about. They don't want to be pressed on. And and as far as how we do it, it's always the best as someone that interviews people for a living is to be authentic and to be honest. That's the key, because people know, and that's part of the ideal behind the book is people know when they're being deceived and someone's being honest, but a lot of times they don't know why they know it. They can't put a name to it. They don't really know why they know it. They just have that feeling. So same thing works with us as a counselor or as an interviewer, as a law enforcement officer, or as a parent. People can tell if you're being dishonest with them, if you're not shooting straight with them, you're not being authentic with them. And I think that's a key part is you have to be very honest and upfront and somewhat, pragmatic in your approach to it. Be caring, be sympathetic, but not effusively so to the point that you're an emotional wreck also, because they're kind of looking in the world of addiction. I think they are probably, and I know in the world of criminal investigations, many times the bad guy's looking for someone, a little bit of a solid rock to cling to. The hardcore sociopath criminals aren't, but many people that we deal with in law enforcement, victims, witnesses, and sometimes bad guys, are actually want that strength that they get from the investigator that's questioning them, because suddenly someone's in control, someone's running the show, and they don't feel like they're responsible to run the show, because a lot of times there's a lot of stress involved with trying to juggle all these balls. If you're a bad guy and you're trying to juggle all these balls to keep out of trouble, that's stressful. If you're caught up in addiction and you're being dishonest with your family and your finances are crap and your health is going down and your relationship with your kids, that's a lot of glass balls you're juggling at the same time. And the stress is in tremendous amount. And having that counselor or that person talking to them that is being honest, straightforward, non-judgmental, but yet not sitting there trying to baby them, I think a lot of them really actually appreciate that and respond to that well. I know you specialize a lot in dealing with first responders and military people in the area of addiction. They really respond to that because that's their mentality from their previous profession. So, I think that's kind of the way I try to approach things is just be very honest, be authentic, and, be yourself, be kind, be sympathetic, be, upbeat, but pragmatically honest.
It's interesting that you say that because I had, in the last couple of weeks, I had a patient that came in and was talking to us. And this individual, as human beings, I don't think he and I could have been any different if we'd have tried. If you know me, I'm the straight-laced coat and tie kind of guy. And this person was the exact opposite of that, very long hair, walking around in pajamas, during the day and, very, very carefree and just different, just different than me. And the only reason I point that out is because the entire time this person was there, it was, everything that we're talking about here, I don't think I'm an alcoholic. In fact, he was very honest. He said, I'm going to leave here and I'm going to continue drinking. I just, like a lot of people, he didn't want to really stop drinking. He just wanted to not have the consequences from his drinking. He wanted to be able to drink under control. Not atypical, but this guy was one of the more brutally honest people about it, that when I leave here, I know I'm going to drink again because I want to. I don't want to stop drinking. And he's a young guy, so I think that he's not really faced a lot of the consequences that a lot of the older patients have. So he kept telling me about it, and I kept talking about the progression of the addiction, the disease model of addiction, and all of these different issues, and just really kept hammering it home. And we would talk. And after this individual discharged, shockingly, I think one of the last people I thought would have ever reached back and called me after discharging was this particular individual. But he did, and he called me and he said, I did start drinking. And I said, I know. You told me you were going to do that. He said, yeah. And he says, are you mad at me? And I said, no, of course not. Why would I be mad at you? You told me you were going to do it. And he said, but I want to let you know that I've really been thinking about the things that you're saying, and I'm seeing it coming true. Everything that you told me was going to happen is starting to come true. And he says, I just want to let you know I'm going to be trying. I really am going to be trying. And what you said to me was not lost on me. And I'm coming to grips with it. And I'm going to do the best that I can. But I wanted to let you know that. And I said, that's interesting. It's funny that, you've been drinking. When was the last time you drank? And he said, well, I've been drinking all day today. And I said, well, just out of curiosity, why did you feel a need to, I'm glad that you called, but why did you call? And he said, I just wanted to let you know that your efforts were not lost. And the reason why I'm calling you back is I wanted to let you know that I really appreciated how I never felt judged by you. And in fact, I don't feel like I'm being judged by you right now. And that I'm going to try and, I'll call you or ask me if it was okay to call back in the future if need be. And I thought that was a pivotal movement and kind of summarizes what you're talking about, Frank, is that connection and that getting well, it was right there. This individual said he did not feel like I judged him in the actions that he was taking. And that's important. That's critical, isn't it?
Yeah. No, that's an amazing story. And that's exactly what I was saying. You were honest, you were non-judgmental, but you were pragmatic in how you approached it. You went down the litany of things that are going to happen in the progression, and you just presented it as a fait accompli. And I think he appreciated that. You weren't trying to be preachy. You weren't trying to, convert him. You weren't trying to force your will upon him. It's up to him. But I think and he responded to that. And enough that the guy did something that most of them will never do, I would assume, is to actually call back and say, hey, just so you know, I've been drinking, But I've been thinking about what you were saying too, and I think you're probably right. I mean, you made a connection with that guy because he knew you were honest and you were authentic, and you weren't doing it for your self-aggrandizement. You were just telling him the facts of life, and he's going to have to accept it now or accept it later. But the facts of life are still going to be the facts of life.
But not, but having that connection and not judging the person for that. We tell things to people that we like. We like you, we respect you, we trust you, and we don't feel judged by you. And, for me, and I'll give you the last word on this, Frank, but I think so far what I've been learning, not only in the criminal investigations world, but in the counseling world, is that is key. If you want to be effective with clients, in our case, you must build, I cannot overestimate the importance of rapport building and trust between you and the client. That's going to be, because if you don't have that, none of the other things that you've been talking about, Frank, are going to be useful if you don't have that initial alliance and that rapport building. And maybe just take us out, Frank, with your final thoughts on that.
Well, there's an old saying is, when you've been lied to by someone, that I'm not mad at you because you lied to me. I'm mad at you because I can never believe you again.
Yeah.
And that's where we're coming from, is if you tried to deceive people, and if people tried to deceive you, you never look at them the same again. You never trust them quite that much again. And in the world of counseling, in the world of criminal investigation, there's going to be an impact. In the world of business, if people find out that you're dishonest, if you, there's a guy that was building decks for all the new houses in my neighborhood. And at the time, it seemed like a good deal, and he looked like he did a great job. 6 years down the road, they're all falling apart. And no one would ever do business with this guy again. Now, he made a few bucks at the beginning, but no one will ever recommend him again to anybody else building a house because he did shoddy work. That's what we're talking about. You have a short shelf life when you're dishonest with people, whether it's in your personal life or professional life. And that goes back to the mercenary and missionary. You have to be more missionary than mercenary to survive in life and to be successful, whether it's in your business life or personal life. You always have to try to be as honest as you possibly can. And sometimes the honest truth is not pleasant, but it's a heck of a lot better than a good lie. So that's where I come down on. It's like, honesty is always going to serve you better than being deceptive.
Yeah, that is so true. And Frank, I'm so excited for you in this book. It has just been released, and it's really a good read. It's very practical, guys. I mean, this is a book that you're going to keep on your desk. You can use. My wife just asked me the other day if she thought that this would be a good book for me to read. I know some of the counselors that I work with up at the treatment center that I'm at have asked about it. And, guys, it really is useful for anything that you do. And it's not a long read. It's really not. But Frank, tell us how we can get hold of it. Just let the listeners know about not only your book, but even your podcast and some of the other stuff that you have coming up here soon.
Sure. Well, the book is about 200 pages long. In there, I've used a lot of statements from criminal cases that people may be familiar with, the Casey Anthony case, the George Zimmerman, Trayvon Martin case, Susan Smith, Oscar Pistorius, those type of things. Because, there's always everyone is interested in true crime. And, for me, I find that these are not only good examples of deceptive language, but also interesting stories for people and to keep them entertained. So that's why I included those in there. But once again, this is more of a book for the layman or someone that interviews and talks to people on a regular basis for their work or just as a mentor, whatever through, church. As far as getting the book, it's on Amazon. You just go to Lies People Tell. You can put in Lies People Tell, Frank Runles. It's Runles, and it'll pop up. You can go to my publisher, bookbaby.com/bookstore and put in Lies People Tell, and it'll pop up there also. It's at Barnes & Noble, online, Barnes & Noble, I think online at Walmart, and in a few other places. So it's, out there. It's in pre-sale right now. The paperback version will be published, come out April 11th. Right now, people can get the ebook version of it immediately through Amazon or BookBaby. Please, if anyone's interested in just learning how to be a better communicator, and if you like a little psychology, if you like a little true crime, and you just find something like this interesting, I think this will be an interesting read for you.
Man, that's fantastic. Very exciting. And thank you for coming on the show. Really appreciate it.
No, I appreciate you having me on, Mike.
Yeah, no problem. Once again, guys, this episode's been sponsored by FHE Health. According to SAMHSA, first responders are 30% more likely to develop behavioral health conditions like PTSD. FHE Health specializes in getting first responders better and cleared for duty. So find out more at FHEHealth.com. So guys, as I always like to say, you know what? I don't represent any group that's out there. I don't represent anyone other than myself. And my purpose for giving this information is to share with you what I've done, because it's helped me and maybe it'll help you too. And if we've talked about anything here that doesn't apply to you today, just discard that, but use what you can, because that's what we do in recovery. We help others while we're helping ourselves. And once again, visit our Facebook page, which is Recovery is Possible, and our website, VanMeterWellnessSolutions.com. Let me know how I'm doing, and let us know if there's a topic that you're interested in hearing about, because I'd love to hear from you. Frank would love to hear from you. And so, guys, with that, take care of yourselves, and we will be talking with you soon. And we will be talking to you again next week, and you're going to love the topic, because this is Recovery is Possible, guys. Take care. Bye-bye.